Business is messy and unpredictable.
Sometimes lonely.
So lonely.
So lonely.
And inspiration can often come from really weird places.
We pick up where the bullet point blogs and the highlight reels leave off.
We start with the stories. Welcome back to So Here's My Story. I'm Jody.
I'm Elliot.
And today is a very important day.
It is a very important day.
So I actually want to pause and thank Nikki, your wife.
Yes.
Nicole, actually. You call her Nikki.
I call her Nikki.
I call her Nikki in my mind, but if I was speaking, I don't know if she likes Nicole or Nikki better, but for the purposes of today, I want to thank Nikki for sharing you with me today because it's your 20th wedding anniversary.
It is.
Yeah.
It is.
So wow. Thank you, Nikki. That was very gracious of you.
Yeah. She actually feels so invested in the podcast, not only because I talk about it and I enjoy it so much, but because when I finished up the other podcast where you actually posted the note from where we had an interview. So I finished that up, but I was looking for something that I really wanted to do. And she said, if you want another podcast, why don't you talk to Jody? It's like, yeah, maybe I'll talk to Jody. So she always thinks of herself as the origin.
The matchmaker of this. Well, thank you, Nikki, for both of those things and for sharing Elliot today so we can get a little bit of recording in because I'm going to be gone at Podcast Movement and then on my family vacation. So we're doing a couple shows all at once here. So
absolutely.
Thank you, Nikki.
Thank you, Nikki.
All right. Before we jump into our story, I do want we had another exciting thing to announce this week. So we had another person join the Facebook group, Benjamin, and Benjamin is from Rwanda.
I know. How cool is that?
Isn't that cool? So now we have Brazil, Sweden, and Rwanda and of course, several North American representatives, of course, but that's really exciting in the Facebook group. I mean, we have listeners in, I think now like 70 countries or something, yeah. But in the Facebook group, which is really starting to fill out, and we're going to be having, I hope, some really fun conversations in there soon. So jump on in, especially if you're from Asia or Australia. I want to round out the continents. If we have an Antarctica listener, please jump in. Yeah. Our 7-continent group.
But it is cool that Benjamin's from Rwanda, although I think that's from our perspective, because I don't think Benjamin thinks it's that cool, because probably a lot of people he knows are from Rwanda.
I was wondering where you were going with that. I was like, please don't make fun of Rwanda.
I don't know that it's that cool. Everybody I know is from Rwanda.
Oh, man. All righty. So why don't you thank our sponsors and we can jump on in.
As always, I'd like to thank Tom Loveland at Mind Over Machines, Katz Copy, the architecture firm of GWWO, and Marycraft Staffing and HR Solutions.
All right. Why don't you take us away?
So here's my story. I was actually kind of reflecting back on other anniversaries of sorts, and these are anniversaries with certain clients that I've had for well over a decade. And one of them came to mind because the person who referred him to me was very hesitant to refer him to me. What he said about my client, he said, look, I'll change his name just to protect the innocent, but he said, so Bob is a really nice guy. He runs a great business. I think you'd work really well with him, but I'm not going to say that Bob is high maintenance.
Which is a nice way of saying Bob is high maintenance.
But I will say this. Bob expects you to call him back. If he calls and you don't call him back, the way he sees that through his filter is that he's not important, you don't care, and he'll go elsewhere. And if you say you're going to have something done on Tuesday, he views that as a commitment. But if you called him on Monday and said, hey, I said Tuesday, but you know what, because of this, that, and the other thing, it's really looking like Thursday, generally speaking, unless it's an emergency, he's okay with that.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
There have to be touches, because what Bob abhors, like nature, is a vacuum. And he left two of his previous lawyers because of a sense of apathy. It wasn't incompetence. Right. It wasn't hostility. It wasn't the fact that they couldn't communicate. It was a sense of apathy. So my point is that I deeply appreciated that referral, because it wasn't that somebody referred business to me, which is always appreciated, but to give an insight like that, because, I always try, and I'm sure our listeners who run businesses always try to be responsive and to do all those things, but it's so incredibly valuable to have that insight into somebody's personality and what the hot buttons are.
It's like getting a little bit of if somebody, if you pass someone off to someone, like passing along with it a little bit of a care and feeding manual.
Yes, and that's exactly what it was.
Care and feeding of Bob.
That's exactly what it was. And so now we've been together. He's been a client of mine for well over 10 years now. I love him, love working with him. He works with several other people in the firm. And with each one of those people, I'll tell them, look, you're working with Bob. Here's a key for Bob's care and feeding. And everything goes great as long as people know that.
Well, I think what's so important about this is otherwise that there's sort of two ways, because you said everyone tries to, take good care of their clients or their employees or whatever. And that's true, I think. But if you, or it's true most of the time. The problem is if you don't have some kind of understanding of what the person's priorities are or what they care about most, that means that you're trying to do everything well all the time, which is kind of an impossible standard. And then if you're going to filter that down from do everything right all the time, you're using your own filter about what you care about and what matters to you. And that may or may not matter to the other person. And it almost reminds me of that 5 Love Languages book. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
I've heard the title. I haven't read it.
Yeah. Here's the super short version. It's saying that there's like 5 love languages, and one is words, one is touch, one is gifts, one is acts of service.
Gifts with a T, right?
Gift. Yes.
Because those very short movie things
gifts.
on.
Yeah, no.
That's
I love you.
language.
Here's a gift. And I never know whether they're GIFs or gifts. I think it's gifts, I think so too. But for years I said GIFs because I'd never heard anybody say it. Anyway, I digress. There are 5 of them. I can't remember which one I left out at this point. It might be like time together. I can't remember. But the whole point of that book and why it seems relevant here is that if your love language is touch or words and someone else's love language is acts of service, they may be showing their love for you by like filling up your car with gas or, making sure you have a lunch packed or something. And you may appreciate those things, but then be like, but they don't really love me because the translation isn't there, and vice versa. So, kind of knowing someone's love language, for lack of a better way to say it, that care and feeding of them helps you prioritize like what's important to Bob. Like by making sure I do these things, then I know he feels the way I want him to feel, and I can, deliver great work for him, but I make sure that I don't irritate him or make things.
No, and that's true. And I will tell you this on the occasion of my 20th wedding anniversary, there are certain adjustments and understandings that you have to make as a married couple. And so Nikki, for example, particularly during the rise of social media, which was during our marriage, she would see people online going, I love my wife so much, and this is whatever. And all these glowing and incredibly personal messages online.
Written in exactly that tone.
Yes. Well, that's exactly right. If you had an audio, that's, I love my wife.
I love my wife.
But when Nikki would talk to her friends, she would go, yeah, Elliot doesn't do that. He's not like demonstrative on social media. But Elliot will remember if I happen to mention that I really had a yearning for chocolate cake. Elliot will make it his mission. I was just thinking
of that example. I was going to say that. You ruined my story.
To find this, or if he's out, and what I had always done when I'm out at a business dinner, so I wasn't home for dinner, I would always, and if the table was getting desserts, I would always order a dessert to go to bring home to Nikki, just to make sure that, because I was thinking about her and I wanted her to
So her love language is cake?
Her love language is cake. It's pastries.
Oh, pastries. I knew I loved that woman.
So, but it's a difference because if she really was looking for the kind that needed somebody to be looking deep into her eyes and saying, I love you, and professing love in social media and for the whole world to see, I'm not that guy.
Wrong guy. Right. No, it is. And so it's funny. I had a different kind of referral when my assistant was referred to me by another colleague of mine who was she was doing all of his scheduling and for his groups and individual sessions and whatnot. And that's what I needed. And that's a really hard thing to find someone for. But as one of my favorite sort of business wisdom lines that someone said to me one time, the right who comes with a how. Like she already knew how to do it. And so
I like that line.
Yeah, me too. And I live by it, and she's my example of that because she just did it seamlessly, which was fantastic. But as he was sort of passing her to me, he also gave me some of those like care and feeding things. And he said, look, she is fantastic at what she does. And he's like, and I know you're a like personal connection kind of person. So you're going to want to ask her how her weekend was, or like, talk to her as a person.
Sure.
He's like, she's not a robot. She's perfectly fine and actually wants to connect that way. But after you get down to business, if you start your conversations with her like that, you will stress her out because there are things she needs, like wants to accomplish. And that's why she's so good at what she does, is she is a bulldog with implementation and getting things done. And she doesn't forget anything ever. And in fact, there's a number of times where I say, hey, this person doesn't want to come to this thing for a while. We're going to check back with them in June. And then all of a sudden in June, this email will show up where she's like re-inviting them back. And I will have completely forgotten that was a thing. Like, she's great at, but I know to like do our business on the call. And then we chat about that stuff and we've become great friends and whatnot. And it's just those, like, it might have taken me a while to realize that or in fact, we might have not have gotten off to a great start because I would have just I'd been like, oh, she seems stressed out all the time. This isn't working for me. Whereas this way I got to skip over all that and just treat her the way she wanted to be treated or needed to be treated.
And I think it's such an incredible insight. And when you were talking about love languages, one of them, and I don't know whether this is one of them, but you had said time. And it struck me because I have a client who really needs to know that they're on an emotional level, that the relationship is important to me as a person, as opposed to just being a lawyer and whatever. Yeah. And so what I found is that every once in a while, if I reach out to him, because I know that he takes one day a week off, if I reach out to him and I say, hey, how about we just get together for coffee? For, on this one day. If I do that once every couple of weeks, even once a month, and there's no agenda, I don't need to talk to him about a matter that's going on, just to check in, it's great. The relationship thrives because his love language isn't efficiency and everything I do. It's time that I'm not just, he's not a transaction to me. Right.
Well, and here's the funny thing, because I think someone could listen to this conversation, and I could imagine myself listening to this conversation, and for at least a few seconds have a concern that this could start to sound somehow like manipulative or something, like how to do the thing. I could just imagine
I see what you're saying.
Yeah, like, well, if I do this thing, then that person will act this way or whatever. So I do want to address that just in case it starts to sound that way. Is I think of it more as like the investment a relationship needs, like almost like fertilizer for a plant or something. It's like, this is because when you said that's what makes the relationship thrive, because it reminds me of in one of Stephen Covey's, I think it's Stephen Covey, The Speed of Trust book, the most substantive thing out of there that I just think is so important, and it's why this care and feeding I think is so important as a topic, is that trust, which is really what we're building here. You're building this sense of trust. Trust is both a rational and an emotional act. And so some people need more on the emotional side. They need to have that, make sure that part of the tank stays full to be trustworthy. And the rational side, like you could trust somebody from the sort of like, well, they see, I'm not worried about them screwing me over. Like that's the emotional side. That rational side, though, is you could have people you trust emotionally, but if they fundamentally don't deliver, if they don't do what they say they're going to do, that erodes trust, and vice versa. You could have somebody who always does what they say they do, and they just give you the skeevies, like something's weird about them. So you really do need both, and that's why I think this is not it's not a it also comes back to that. I think sometimes when people want to somehow distinguish business from personal is why, like, you have to be, it's just absolutely insane. Because you have to be able to trust the people that you're working with. And so this all becomes this ecosystem of trust and the humanity and of people and just getting along and what it takes to make that relationship thrive.
Well, and so then I think that you have to delve into the practical aspects of it. So, so how does that work? Because, we've discussed the overall concept, but I'll tell you one thing, and this is, I'm sure, by far the not the only way, but I will ask people who work for me, and I will ask clients, how do I screw up this relationship? What stresses you out? How am I going to make you hate this? And so
you do that with contracts too, don't you? Like, what will, I remember one time I had an opportunity, and I said, I want you to help me think through what I need to think through. And you said, what would make this business partnership you're thinking about go completely south? And I love that as a way to look.
Yeah, because you tell stories. And so, like, my secretary would say, okay, what stresses me out is this. If I have 4 things to do, and that's fine, I'm fine with that. But if nobody actually tells me what has the priority, or if, and she talks about communication, just let me know.
Right.
If something's bugging you, if I do something wrong, don't just do it yourself. Don't just fix it.
Yeah.
Let me know, because then it'll blow up down the road and I won't have had an opportunity to fix it. With clients, I'll ask, almost seeking that same referral that I got for Bob, the care and feeding. Tell me your care and feeding. And if a lot of times, if I ask on the positive, what do you really want to see in a lawyer? Whatever, they'll just say, well, I want him to be good at the law, and that is the voice they all use. I don't know. It's uncanny. Well, I want them to be good at the law.
Yeah.
But if you ask people for their crash and burn, this is why I like being people's second lawyer. I don't like being their first. But if you ask them, what really pisses you off? How do I ruin this? How do I make you go, look, I got to find somebody else?
Right.
And they'll say, oh, yeah, well, this is it. And they'll give either drawn from an experience or drawn from a friend's experience or whatever it is. And I was like, okay. And the way they tell the story, and you can always tell a powerful story because it's rich in detail. The way they tell a story, I'm like, there's the hot button.
Yeah.
And it's not like I wouldn't have tried to avoid this before. I would not answer their phone calls for 48 hours or whatever before. But now I know that this is their hot button. It
reminds me of the, oh my gosh, I've completely lost my train of thought. It's happened twice in the same jump in and save me from.
Well, but you caught it before, which was very impressive.
I did. I caught it before it completely went, but that one went. And there were
actually 2 things that I thought you did very impressive on this. One was you said, oh, I lost my train. And then you came back. And I thought, well, that's hard to do. The other thing is you went into the love languages.
Right.
And what I try to avoid, because I've done this in front of a jury, I try to avoid going, there are 27 points that I want to make. If I list a number, I know I'm going to miss it.
Right.
And the jury counts.
Oh, right. So if I just said there are love languages,
there are several love languages. Yeah. And then, so I fudge on that.
Anyway, so I think there's a very, very, very practical side of it, which is, because I'm not even going to try to get back to wherever we were a minute ago because it's long gone now. When I worked at the architecture firm, I remember now. Okay, I can weave this right in. Because I think part of it's just simply asking, like you said, it's the conversation of asking people,
yes,
like, what do you care about? I will say it's not a question that they get asked all the time, so they're probably not going to have an answer. But as you said, like that second lawyer thing, I think you can train them to be paying attention to like what matters and what doesn't. Yeah. And I had an assistant working for me years ago that I actually had her keeping a list of like because I knew she wouldn't be there forever. She was young and she was going to go back to school and whatnot. And so I had her keep this list of like the care and feeding of Jody Hume, of like things that she noticed. I said, and in particular, notice things that bug you because it's probably something that like somebody going forward has to be able to handle. And one of the things she identified was that, because it drove her crazy, and it was good for me to know going forward that this has to be this kind of person, is I'm a verbal processor. I can think and plan all I want in my own head, but it is not until I start speaking that I really think things through. And that's when my ideas come. And so what would happen is I'd say, hey, I just had an idea. We should, and whether I was going to talk about a process we were going to implement or a way that we were going to organize client information or something. And I would have thought it all out at home and it made perfect sense. But as I would tell her about it, I would either suddenly realize the disastrous flaw in my plan, or I would come up with just something that made the whole thing 10 times easier. But that would happen like halfway to 2/3 through me telling her about it. And she'd be taking notes. And we would have this awful train wreck of a moment where what I would call her this face that she would make that was like her, but I already wrote it down face. It's like, she's like, but I'm taking notes. I'm like, right. Okay. But the plan doesn't work. We're not going to do it just because you wrote it down somewhere. And so that sort of like that Karen feeding of like, let Jody talk for a few minutes. And then once she lands on the thing, then write it down.
Well, but what also occurs to me is that I'm not sure that you would make a really good supervillain. Because part of the job description of being a supervillain is that you have to capture your enemy, and then you have to monologue about your plan. And I have this image of the person tied up and you're monologuing about your evil plan, and then right in the middle you realize, oh, that's the flaw.
Yeah, I make a terrible supervillain. By the way, I took a little sip of my drink right before you said that, and I poor Tom almost had to edit out a spit take.
That would be great. It's always a victory for me. But one of the things that you were talking about is with your time at the architecture firm, and it reminds me because I really like posing the questions in the negative. So I would imagine that if somebody says, if an architect is talking to a client, say, what would you really like to see in this retail space? That's a hard question to answer.
Yeah.
But if the question is, what's really bugged you about shopping experiences or whatever in there, because people know what bugs them. Right.
Well, because what they like is this amorphous open zone. And so you can a lot of times learn from not that. It's funny, back to the architecture firm, there was one of the principals there. I would train the staff. I'm like, when we would get new administrative staff, I was like, all right, this guy hates paper clips. Like he prefers staples. And I was just trying to save them from getting the
I'm
staples.
Sure he had his big reasons.
Oh, it was a talk. No, actually they're legitimate.
I'm not saying that they weren't, but I'm sure that he has a monologue on that.
Paper clips would like gather other papers, sometimes accidentally, let go of a paper accidentally. And it's, I'm not saying that I'm team staple necessarily, but I understood his paper clip issues. But I just wanted to save them from the big talk about the staple clips, staples and paper clips. And there was like 4 or 5 things about him that was just kind of Karen feeding. But I did that to make his life easier, but also to make their life easier. Yeah. If you can save, it's kind of smoothing out the space with things like you don't have to relearn lessons. There's an efficiency to it, I think. So from a practical side, like what do you do with this? I think understanding your own Karen feeding manual. Like I often say, like, if you love me, don't make me pick restaurants. Like I hate, somebody says, where should we meet? I'm like, and all of a sudden I forget that I know of any restaurant on the planet. So that's straight at the top of my Karen feeding manual. So like knowing your own things, but then also just asking people, your staff, because with the conversation that I get probably over and over and over again as a frustration from anyone who's at any level of a company, is the fact that you have to have like a different set of rules for everyone. People have not different set of rules as in like company rules. I'm not saying like everyone gets a different vacation policy, but something that it's like kids, the discipline strategy that works for my son doesn't work for my daughter. They need a different kind of dance steps. And that's really frustrating in business because you feel like you've worked out something as a leader that really works and then it doesn't work on this person. And there can be a frustration in that. I think it's more than a frustration. It can be people can get kind of indignant about it. Like, why do I have to, shouldn't they just do what I say because, I said it, or shouldn't, those aren't quite the right words, but there's this like, why should I have to figure out what works for somebody? And in theory, you don't. I mean, that's the thing. Like this isn't a must topic that we're talking about here, but it sure as hell is will make your life a lot easier if you choose to.
Yeah, I mean, the why do I have to do that? I think we could do a whole podcast going down that rabbit hole.
They're getting a paycheck. Shouldn't they just do it?
Well, yeah, but I mean, I think that
we're doing a lot of voices this episode, by the way.
Yes, we are.
There's a lot of voices.
But I think it should be part of the onboarding process. So for example, when I have a marketing person come in and in my firm, because I like marketing, I work directly with that person more than anybody else does. Mm-hmm. But I'll have, as part of the onboarding, I'll have the new marketing person sit down with Kim or Lacey or somebody who works closely with me, not on marketing, but just on anything, without me in the room, so they can say, okay, if you're working with Elliot, here's what you need to know. You know, and it's very helpful. Now, some of that is if you just ask Elliot to do something, he may remember.
Right.
He may not.
Yes.
You can't. This is what you have to do.
This is true.
This is yes. So you've got to put it in front of him this way, or you've got to do this, and that's not bugging him. If his door is shut, you don't look at the shut door and then turn on your heel and walk away, because he could just be eating a sandwich, or he could be. It doesn't matter. Knock on the door, and if he needs it shut, he'll tell you. He won't get ticked off. But there are certain little things about working with me that this person has to know, and it's part of the onboarding process, and the relationship goes a lot more smoothly. Yeah, no, I think it's all of this falls into this category that comes up quite often of making the invisible visible by just bringing it out into the light so that it's a known instead of a guess. I think the more you can save people from guessing, it makes everyone's lives easier, because in some places a shut door means you so much as knock and the person will lose it, because a shut door means leave me the hell alone. Right. And so you just need, there's no way to know those social cues if you're not introduced to them. No, and they're not in the policy handbook or the personnel manual. They're not in the policy handbook. Yeah. No. So kind of learning those dance steps with somebody, I think, can be such a shortcut to getting the most out of the relationship so that it thrives. So that's our story.
But the discussion doesn't have to end here.
No, it does not.
In fact, we don't want it to.
No, we don't.
That is why we actually have our private Facebook group,
which we started to make sure that we could get your comments, your rants, your thoughts,
your stories. You can find links to that group, as well as show notes and links to subscribe via email, and how to find us just about anywhere you can possibly find podcasts at sohere'smystory.com.
And you can also find us on Facebook and Twitter at SHMS Podcast.
And since we know it takes a village.
Yes, it does.
We'd like to thank our village, our super talented, incredibly patient team.
And occasionally snarky team.
Yeah, but in the best of ways.
In the best of ways.
Snarky.
Yes.
Good mockery.
So a huge shout out to the people who actually help us produce our show. First, our sound engineer, Tom Hansen.
Thanks to Christy Schmier for our brilliant show notes and all the other fantastic writing she does for us.
And to Taylor Mathauer for doing just a little bit of everything.
Including wrangling us.
Which
is no small feat.
No, it's not.
This is Jody Hume.
And I'm Elliot Wagenheim.
And you've been listening to So Here's My Story.